I'm Jacqueline Morgan, and today we're going to be going over the essentials for canning, water bath canning to be specific. So I'm going to give you the tips and the tricks. We're going to talk about the tools that you need to use, the things that you're looking for, and everything that you need to help make sure that that jar seals perfectly. So let's get started. So I'm sure you're familiar with the jar. You know that you need these to be canning things and preserving, but we are going to take this apart. The first thing that you have is your jar. So these can actually be reused year after year, so long as they don't have any cracks or chips in the jar itself or up here at the top. The next thing is the band or the ring. You can reuse these year after year, so long as they're not rusty. And even if they are rusty, I've seen some on top of jars that have been rusty before. It's just not good because sometimes it'll stick and it'll get really difficult to get it off your jar. So it's best if these are new and they're very clean and shiny and not rusty. The next thing are the lids or the flats. So these you need to buy every year. You can't reuse them because whenever you pop open the seal on a jar, chances are you'll try and use your fingers, and kudos to you if you can do that. Sometimes that hurts my fingernails, so I'll get a knife or a spoon and pop underneath of there. And whenever you do that, you can put just the tiniest little indent in the side of the seal, and that will prevent it from sealing again. So you won't be able to use them again. So you can buy just these flats in a box by themselves. You can buy the rings and the flats in a box by themselves, or you can buy the whole kit and caboodle and it'll look like this in a whole pack. It just depends on what you need, how much you already have, and all of that. So now we are going to move on to the tools that we're going to be using. This is a water bath canner. They're usually 21 and a half quarts, and it holds 9 pint-sized jars and 7 quart-sized jars, if I'm remembering correctly. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's what mine in particular holds. It will come with a lid. You can buy this as a package set. It will come with a stainless steel pot and a rack on the inside. So this is dual purpose. It helps keep your jars up out of the water whenever you're loading up your canner, and then you're just going to simply take these handles down and drop your jars down into the water and put your lid on. So if you are ready for the commitment, then by all means buy one of these. I think I ended up buying this for maybe $50. It wasn't a huge expense, but if you already have some stock pots in your kitchen that are smaller and you're not going to be processing as many jars, by all means use that. And if you have a rack that'll fit in there, that's great. If you don't, you can kind of MacGyver it by using a bunch of these rings or bands. You just simply put them on the bottom of the pot, lay it out. The jars that you're processing just need something to sit on, and something metal preferably. But so they'll just be in the bottom of the stock pot, and you can just put your jar on top of there, and voila, you made your own water bath canner with the stuff that you already have. So they have stainless steel water bath canners, which is awesome because if you're in a pinch and you need to cook something and you need a bigger pot, you can use this. They also have aluminum ones, and if you use the aluminum ones, then you can't do pickles and you can't do anything tomato-based because it'll leach into the sauce that you're doing and it'll give it that like metallic-y taste. So now that we've talked about the water bath canner, we are going to be moving on. This, in some of my videos, I didn't really know what my mind would go blank. So I would just say this little thingamajigger or thingamabob or dual purpose doohickey. I came up with a lot of creative words to describe this not jar lifter, it's a lid lifter. This is a jar lifter. This is a lid lifter, so it is actually dual purpose. It has a magnet on this side so that whenever your lids or flats are in their saucepan in the water warming up, you can easily just put that in, pull one out, and you don't have to put your fingers in the hot water, and you don't have to use a fork. But if you don't have one of these, you can use a fork. Easy as that. The other side is the spatula. So after you put your food into your jar, you slide this down in there to make sure that any of the air around your food escapes. So you want to do that because if you don't, that air is going to escape anyways, hopefully. you want it to escape. But whenever it does, if there's air inside of here hiding underneath of your food and you're processing it, that air is going to escape and your juice level is going to lower. So then the lower your juice level is, the more food you don't have covered in that juice, and then it could turn brown, it could turn like a different color than the rest of the jar, and it's not gonna look as pretty. So this is going to help get that excess air out of there. It's also going to help push things down inside. So that is what this is for. Again, if you don't have one of these, you don't need it. You don't need it. You can simply use a fork to lift your lids out of the saucepan, and you can use a knife. I was gonna say a little spatula, but a knife would be better because it's a lot slimmer. To be able to get that excess air out of your jars. Next thing is a funnel. It just helps control where the food and the liquid is going, and you want that to go in your jar. So well, having one of these will completely benefit you and have less of a mess to clean up. This is a jar lifter, and this is what you are going to use to take those jars out of your water bath canner so you don't have to put your hands in that hot water. These three things you can actually get as a kit, and I want to say maybe it was like 15 bucks. It was very inexpensive compared to everything else relatively. So those are the tools that you can use. I gave you some ideas for alternate tools that you can use if you don't have these specific things. Next up is you're gonna need a washcloth because we wet this. And after you put your food in there and you make sure that you have enough juice, enough liquid, and you give your jar the correct amount of head space, which that's something else we're gonna talk about here in a little bit, you're going to take a wet, clean washcloth and you're going to wipe around that rim to make sure that there's not any juice, there's not any food particles, nothing. You don't want anything to impede your lid from sealing on the top of this jar. So sometimes, depending on how sticky your recipe is, you might have two washcloths. You might go through and do one and then pick up the second one because you know it's cleaner and go and do it a second time. And every time that you do a new jar, just kind of pick a new spot on your washcloth. That way you're not always using the same spot and all of that. So that comes in handy. And then you're going to need a tea towel or a wooden cutting board. That is for your hot jars after they have come out of the canner to rest on top of your countertop, because here's the dilemma. Here's why you need one of these or a wooden cutting board, is because these jars are hot and your countertop, heaven help you if you're doing all this in the summertime, so your kitchen is going to be cooler. So that countertop could be cooler depending on what your countertop is made of. So if you put that hot jar down on a cold countertop, it could go crack. If you put it down on top of like a glass cutting board, it would crack. You're just trying to minimize anything that could go wrong with your jars. So now we're going to talk more specifically just about your jar. So there's a couple things that you need to keep in mind with this. If you are hot packing a jar, which means that you are packing hot food and hot liquid inside of your jar, everything's hot going in, that's called hot packing. You need to make sure that your jar is hot, because otherwise it's just like putting a hot jar on a cold countertop, it would crack. So if you're putting hot liquid inside of here and it's just room temp or it's cooler, heaven help you, and you stick it down into the water bath canner, this actually happened to me when I made my dill pickles. It had gone completely cracked a perfect circle all the way around the jar, and the bottom was down on the water bath canner, and the pickles, luckily because I had crammed the jar, they were still inside the jar, but all the juice and everything was all in the water bath canner. I had to clean it out afterwards. So I don't want that to happen to you. So if you are hot packing your jars, you are going to put your jars into the oven at, I have seen 200 degrees, I have seen 220 degrees. I've even seen 225 on some recipes. So if you're in that 200 to 220 range for your jars, putting them in the oven, that's a good range, because boiling point is 212. So the closer you get to that, the better off you are. I put them on a baking sheet into the oven and I leave them in there for about 15 to 20 minutes. If your jars need to be sterilized, you can put them in the dishwasher and make sure that it has that hot steam mode, because at the end of it, you can just pop open the dishwasher, take out your clean, hot steaming jar, fill it up, and that's good. You don't have to take it out of the dishwasher and put it in the oven and then wait for it to heat up there and kind of dry off. You can literally just take it out of the dishwasher, the hot dishwasher, like just ran it, and fill them one at a time. The other thing that we're gonna be talking about is headspace. And what your headspace is the amount of air between your food and the top of the lid. So what happens when you put your jar down into the water bath canner is that it heats up, and it heats up that air inside of there, and some of the air escapes. It bubbles up the lid a little bit, and then whenever you pull it out and it starts to seal, it creates a vacuum, and it'll suck down that lid. So you want to make sure, if you don't have the proper headspace, that vacuum might not happen. So here is commonly, there's an inch, which is right about down here. You have a 1/2 inch, which is, it's easier for a 1/2 inch because it's right about that lip right here, this bottom part. And then you have a 1/4 of an inch, which is a little bit up higher. I have noticed that for jams or butters, like apple butter, peach butter, things like that, it requires less headspace because you can sometimes self-seal those jars. You don't have to do a water bath canner. You're just self-sealing it. So the less air inside of there that it has to heat up, the better. But your recipe will tell you all of that. So now we have talked about the oven, we've talked about the dishwasher, we've talked about your headspace, all of your utensils, and the things that you're gonna be using. I think you are ready to can. So the only other tidbit of information that I have for you is to make sure that whatever recipe you want to try comes from a tested kitchen and it is reputable and it's not giving you bad advice. There are many blogs out there that will give you recipes, and then at the end of it they'll say, yeah, you can water bath can this is awesome. But then you look at the ingredients and there's meat in it, and it's like, well, no, you can't water bath can that, you need to pressure cook it. So if you see any recipes that have meat, that have corn, that have beans, peas, carrots, things like that, that all needs to be pressure cooked. If you don't take anything else away from this video, that is what I want you to take away right there, is that all of that stuff that I just listed needs to be pressure cooked. But regardless, you can water bath can your fruit and your tomatoes. That is what happens. The other thing is that recipes that you get handed down from generation to generation, the thing is that fruits over time have changed. They have evolved, they have been mixed, they have been bred differently. And so the acid level that could work 50, 60 years ago in a tomato sauce recipe might not work now because that same brand of tomato is not as acidic as it needs to be. So you can easily just take it to your local extension office and they will check it out and give you any like recommendations of what you should change, or little like measurements kind of thing like that. Or you'll see that on recipes for tomato sauce, just to be safe, every quart jar that you're putting in 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, or you're putting in, I believe it's 1 tablespoon of citric acid. I have to look at those conversions there, but you're adding some sort of acid to every single jar to make sure that it is safe. Because if you don't use a tested recipe, you could, heaven help you, come across botulism. There could be yeast activity in your jar and you not see it, or whenever you do open it, there could be mold in there. So you just kind of squandered all of your time and your talent on things that weren't safe and effective. So that is my last tidbit of information. Just make sure that everything is safe. I know it seems daunting, but just do it. Just get out there and do it. It is not as crazy daunting as it seems, promise you. So happy canning.